And welcome back to the podcast. Or if this is your first time joining us here at the Light Path podcast, then you are so warmly welcome. And this conversation today that I want to have with you is such an important one. And if you're anything like me, where you're on the side of social media where things come into your feed all about states of consciousness or energy or the universe, even things around manifestation, teaching or coaching, then you may have heard the term 3D or 5D frequency or consciousness, and how at the moment a lot of the spiritual teachers out there on media are talking about a split or a timeline or reality split that is happening. And so what I wanted to do is what I love to do on this podcast, which is talk it through in really practical terms. So hopefully we can attempt to get some type of understanding of it so we can see where we're at in our lives with it, or maybe even where we want to go with it. Awareness, I think, is power. Awareness is transformation. And maybe we'll get a little bit of that here. And the reason why it's coming up now is because of what is happening in our skies, or I believe it to be because of what is happening in our skies. It is coming up more intensely now as we are in that transition period of Pluto leaving its time and era in Capricorn and moving into what we are calling the new age, or the age of Aquarius, where Pluto will spend the next 20 or so years. So we know Pluto is the planet of death and destruction and then ultimately rebirth. And so when Pluto sits in a sign for 20 years, then the characteristics, the energy, and the influence of that sign's makeup or nature is going to shine forward. And Capricorn and Aquarius energy are very, very different, which is why it feels as if there's this whole new world or new order being birthed. So this transition began back in March 2023, and it was never going to be a moment where Pluto moved into Aquarius and that was it. We're all living in this whole different new reality and life was going to be so different, maybe even so much better. It was going to require a huge transition because the energy of Pluto in Capricorn is very different from the energy of Pluto in Aquarius. And I think nothing really amplifies that more than understanding 3D consciousness, which I believe is really represented in Pluto in Capricorn, and 5D consciousness represented in Pluto in Aquarius. And this is when you hear about timelines shifting or new realities being formed. And you may hear a lot of people talking about, are you going to stay on the 3D or are you going into this new world in the 5D? And the reality is that you are going to probably do both, because whether you like it or not individually, as a collective, the consciousness is changing, it is evolving, it is becoming a lot lighter. Now, this is nothing new. The collective consciousness of humanity is always changing and evolving. It's like saying your great-grandparents' mentality or life experience is very different to yours because humanity has evolved. Conscious awareness has evolved. Our focus has evolved. And as a result, the way in which we live our life has evolved because of the things that we're able to create or put our very focused, desired attention on to make manifest. So this is nothing unusual. It's nothing to be afraid of, but it is a very unique opportunity for us to be able to decide for ourselves on which vibrational frequency or dimension we're going to live in. So a really quick, very surface level recap of the energy of Pluto in Capricorn really amplified all those Capricornian themes. Issues of power, of governance, and you could sum it up really simply by saying like power over the people. It was the area where capitalism, reigned supreme, where consumerism was very much the flavor, and that is how people wielded their power. Like, the more I consume, the more authority or popularity I must have. Very different to Pluto in Aquarius, where the Aquarian themes are all about creating futures and societies that suit all. It's like equality. It's actually a time in which individuals really are invited and actually asked to embody their truest, most authentic selves and bring that and their skills and their goodness and their talents forward for the good of all. It's actually about distribution of power back to the people. So the inner sovereignty is actually ruling. So you can see how those energies are really quite opposite. So when we look at that in terms of dimensions, you'll see how at the moment, as we're in this transition period of Pluto leaving Capricorn and really making its home in Aquarius, we're in a little bit of a push-pull where some people are really embracing the fifth dimension and some people are holding on to dear life to the third dimension, and what that actually means for us in our day-to-day life and interaction with other people. So this transition period of Pluto moving into Aquarius is taking a while because at certain points since March 2023 and all the way up to November 19, 2024, Aquarius is going to tap back in and sit at the sign or in the sign of Capricorn. And it's doing this at the end degrees of Capricorn for us to really see some of the negativity about the last 20 years, or a lot of the ways in which we have done things is no longer desired for moving forward. So 2023, in my personal experience, was a really tough year, as is 2024. It feels sticky, it feels disjointed, it feels like I can get heaps done and nothing at all. It feels like I feel restricted. It may be even more so than in the COVID times, although that was the start of it. And it's really because the old order is dying, but they're not dying quietly. It's like we've asked Capricorn and Pluto to leave the party and it's gotten really annoyed and it's kind of deciding to trash the place. So you may see on the collective level, a lot of governments crumbling or shifting or changing. Look at the distribution of power changing, say, in Europe. The fact that we're having an election this year in America, that will be very interesting to watch. Will the people really begin to stand up and take responsibility for their country and take their leaders into accountability? Like, no surprise that the law was passed just recently in America that the president is immune from prosecution. So basically, they could do anything they want and not get prosecuted for it. That is very Pluto in Capricorn trying to hold on for dear life to power over the people, of comparison, of competition, of better than, rather than what we want to go into in terms of, wait a minute, no, everyone should be treated equal under the law in these rules or laws that we've all agreed to, because they are for the higher good of all and everyone is equal under it. So that's just one of those really practical examples that you've seen. Personally, I've noticed a lot of people that I work with are questioning so much about their lives. Everything has been up for questioning: relationships, purpose, jobs, where they live, what they want out of life. Because the old way that we were taught to be is just not going to work anymore. And so this questioning, I believe, is really healthy, but it feels very, very uncomfortable. And that's okay, But this questioning, this internal power struggle within ourselves is going to continue as we struggle with, well, who am I really? What is it that I really do want to get out of life? What do I want to contribute to life? The word purpose, I'm sure, has come up for you, or it's coming up a lot. Who do I truly want to be? And how do I be that when I've been taught often the total opposite? So this transition period is a little tricky, but let's break it down by understanding 3D and 5D. Well, there's actually 3, 4, and 5D states of consciousness happening that we live in as humans on this earth. So I think that we also transition in and out of these states of consciousness. Like, we're not just always in one. We probably dip into 3D and then back to 5D. So totally normal, and understanding the states of consciousness will help you choose which state of consciousness you really want to sit in. Maybe some people in your life are no longer resonating with you because just vibrating at a different state of consciousness. Now, we know that we live in a vibrational universe. So in this vibrational universe, we are all emitting our own personal frequency. Now, not just us as humans, every single thing, the earth itself, is emitting its own personal frequency. And we know when it comes to frequency, like attracts like. So we'll often find ourselves aligned with people or things or situations that are actually reflecting the frequency or the state of consciousness that we are embodying. And so these dimensions that we're talking about, the 3D, the 4D, and the 5D, are states of consciousness. So states of awareness or states of perception. So how we see the world, or the filter through which we view the world. So these dimensions are not actually places. They are actually states of awareness. And the way I like to think about them is like radio stations. So we know that no matter where you are in this world, there are invisible frequencies flying through the air right now of many different radio stations. And all we have to do is tune the device, in this case, the radio. We have to tune that device into a certain frequency in order to be able to hear it and in order to be able to experience it. So just like that, it happens with states of consciousness. The radio or the device is us, and we get to choose which frequency that we are dialed into, that we're perceiving things from, or the filter through which we operate in this world. So let's go through the states. If you're living in a 3D level of consciousness or perception or awareness, if 3D consciousness is your vibrational frequency, then ultimately you're living in a 3D reality. So anything that you can see, feel, or touch. And ultimately, because you see it as a 3D reality, it breeds the vibration of separateness. It's like there's me and then there's the microphone, and we're completely separate. There's you and there's me, and we are completely separate entities. So in that separateness is a lot of identification with the self and the other. So competition and comparison reign supreme. And the 3D world, so everything outside of ourselves, will be the determiner of how successful we are at that competition or how well we've come out of that comparison. So I'm wondering if you can start to hear how that really speaks to the age of Capricorn, when Pluto was in Capricorn. Capitalism, consumerism. I've said it before on this podcast. Nothing epitomizes for me the Pluto in Capricorn era like the Kardashians. Like grab, get, be bigger, be famous. The more likes you have, the more people that know you is like reigns supreme. And then everyone wants to be like them because they perceive that that will make them happy. And so how good you are in however you perceive good, but in a lot of ways it is about the 3D. So however good your house is, your car is, your job is, your status is, how much money you have, where you go on holidays, what you look like physically, that's where you're going to find your identity, and that's where you're going to pour all your energy into finding your happiness and fulfillment. So your thoughts about what is coming in is really about the outside world and what you can see, feel, touch, and taste. And there's nothing wrong with living this way. I want to really stress that, because there's nothing wrong with having the things that you want or looking the way you want to look or whatever it is. But there are deep-seated and underlying negative or heavier emotions that can be very difficult to integrate. So things like comparison means that you're constantly chasing, like you'll never really be fulfilled, like because there's always a bigger house, there's always another car, there's always a better person to be in a relationship with. So that can be really challenging, and it leaves you with the state of there's always something more. In that 3D state, there's a desire on the outside world for it to look and feel great and to be perceived by others as looking and feeling great, and not so much emphasis on what's going on deep in the inside. Now, if we compare that to 5D state of frequency, awareness, or consciousness, and we really start to embody the 5D, then what we're really looking at there is we're no longer in separateness. Like it's no longer me and you. In the 5D, we begin to see, experience, know, but deeply also integrate the understanding that we are all one. That life and every single expression of it is all deeply and intricately interconnected. And that life isn't necessarily about the pursuit of happiness in the outside. It's actually about the adventure of deep growth and connection to yourself, about the contribution that you can make to the whole that holds the most depth of meaning, power, and understanding. And if the vibration of the 3D was separateness and comparison and competition and consumerism, then the vibrational frequency of the 5D is love, is connectedness, is compassion, is understanding, is gratitude. It's knowing that we're all here as part of the whole, and whatever one person is doing really helps, heals, nourishes, and maybe holds us back, but connects us to all. It's not about competition, it's about connection. So ultimately, when we're looking at vibrational frequency, you can see that the 3D is very different to the energy of the 5D. And that's what a lot of the spiritual teachers are talking about when they see that there's these timelines splitting, and there's a new world order and there's an old world order, and ultimately it's up to us in terms of which one we want to live in. Now, there is a 4D in between, and that's really oscillating between the two, which is, I think, where most of us live most of the time, due to our conditioning, due to the fact that we've just been in a really intense 3D, the fact that we have egos, all of that keeps us kind of in the 4D. But ultimately, any work a spiritual teacher or mentor is trying to do is to raise our vibrational frequency, to tune the dial in to the 5D frequency of consciousness. And ultimately, that is a choice. So by choosing to step into the new world order and dial into the 5D, you're going to have so much more expansion, so much more opportunity, so much more happiness, because of what the 5D frequency is ultimately all about. And that 3D, that underlying kind of heavy energy of the 3D of like it's never going to fulfill you properly, will contempt us to drag us down there, but it's never a place of satiation. Like you're never going to feel as good, which is why people are seeking this now. So what happens when you are cultivating a 5D frequency and people around you are on the 3D frequency? Well, ultimately what happens is you're tuning into different radio stations. So you completely might be physically near each other, but you're in no way connected. And in a lot of the time, no way even crossing each other's paths. Like if you ever had an experience of, say, a friend or even a partner that you've been with and so connected with, but then when you break up because you're on different paths, you literally don't even bump into them. It's because you're in totally different realities. You're in totally different frequencies. So you don't run into them. And if you do, there's really nothing to say. Like it just feels odd or weird. So that is basically what is going to happen. So if you're choosing to step into the 5D and people in your life are choosing to stay in the 3D, then ultimately, there is separation. You may not be physically in their lives, or if you are, it will be a very 4D oscillating type of relationship that if you're in 5D, you're not really going to get from them what you need, or you're not going to feel like they understand you, and what you deem as important won't be the same for them. And you'll feel more and more potently the longer you stay in that 5D frequency and learn to cultivate it, you will feel the denseness and the heaviness and the vacuousness of the 3D that you actually won't even want to be around it anyway. So whilst it might scare some people that they're losing, they're actually really not. You're gaining everything. So how do you tune into the 5D? Well, you cultivate your level of perception or consciousness through the lens of the 5D frequency: love, connectedness, purpose, contribution, and the fact that you know that there is no separation and that you see everyone and everything through the lens of love. It isn't fanciful. It's not like someone does something horrible to you and you see love in that, but you may see innocence, or you may have compassion for where they're coming from. Not what they did, but maybe where they're coming from. The way you cultivate the 5D frequency and maintain it is work. And that's why we call it the work in the spiritual circles. This is why people take a lot of time on self-care rituals, on meditation, on yoga, on investing in the right food to eat, seriously considering where they live and the vibration of that place and the people they surround themselves with. It takes a lot of work, but it's so worth it. What also takes a lot of work is pouring all your energy and all your focus into how much money you're making and spending all your hours at a job that you hate just so you can drive the car, or say I go to this place on holiday. That takes a lot of energy too, and it takes daily practice. But because we've been so programmed to that's a good thing to do and that's the way we do it, we don't necessarily view it as draining. Whereas the new way of how we care for ourselves and what we find important, trust me, there are millions of people out there doing this, and you will find your tribe eventually if you stick with it long enough. But it will feel lonely, isolating, maybe confusing, maybe disorientating, maybe strange at first as you try to tap into this frequency. So I hope that explanation helped and maybe give you some idea of maybe the ways in which you're feeling or what you've been observing, and may inform a little bit or pique your curiosity on how you can begin to really expand into 5D consciousness. And the work that we do here on the Light Path Collective can really help with that. But as always, I would love to hear your thoughts on our social platforms, and as always, sending you so much love and light as you walk your path of consciousness.